The stars outside the observation window looked cold and distant. Lieutenant Mira-chan pressed her palm against the glass and watched the endless darkness of space. She had been on the Verati diplomatic station for 6 months now. 6 long months of being ignored, dismissed, and treated like a pet that had wandered into a house of wolves. She was the only human on Station Krathvor. The Galactic Council had insisted on it. They wanted a human presence among the Verati as a symbol of peace between the two species. The Verati had agreed, but only because refusing would have made them look weak. They did not actually want her there. They made that very clear every single day. The Verati were terrifying creatures. They stood 8 feet tall on average, covered in thick, dark scales that could stop a knife blade. Their claws were long and curved, designed by millions of years of evolution to tear through flesh and bone. Their teeth were sharp like broken glass, and their eyes glowed a soft amber color in the dim light of their ships. They were apex predators. They had conquered dozens of worlds not through technology alone, but through raw, brutal strength. Myra was 5 feet 4 inches tall. She weighed 120 pounds. She had no claws, no scales, no natural weapons of any kind. To the Verati, she was something between a curiosity and a joke. She walked through the corridors of the station that morning, and the Verati warriors moved past her without a glance. They spoke their harsh, growling language to each other and laughed at things she could not understand. She had learned some of their words over the months, but they rarely spoke to her directly. When they did, it was usually to tell her to move out of their way. Her quarters were small. The Verati had given her a storage room that they had cleared out. It had a bed, a desk, and a small window that looked out at the stars. She had tried to make it feel like home by hanging pictures from Earth on the walls. Photos of her family, her mother and father, her younger brother. Green forests and blue oceans that seemed impossibly far away now. She sat at her desk and began writing her daily report. It was her job to observe and document Verati culture. The Galactic Council wanted to understand them better. They hoped that understanding would lead to lasting peace. Mira was not so sure. The more she learned about the Verati, the more she realized how different they were from humans. Their society was built on strength. Only the strong deserved respect. Only the strong deserved to lead. The weak were tolerated at best, abandoned at worst. This philosophy touched every part of their lives, including how they raised their children. Myra had visited the nursery wing once. It had disturbed her deeply. The Verati did not raise their young the way humans did. They placed all their cubs together in large rooms called crays. The cubs were left to fight among themselves for food, for warmth, for attention from the adult caretakers. The strongest cubs thrived. The weakest cubs often did not survive. The Verati saw nothing wrong with this. It was simply the natural order of things. The strong lived. The weak died. That was how it had always been. Myra had watched a small cub, barely old enough to walk, get pushed away from a feeding trough by larger cubs. The little one had cried out, a high-pitched sound that broke her heart. She had wanted to help, but the Verati caretaker had stopped her with a cold look. "Do not interfere," the caretaker had said. "If it cannot fight for itself, it does not deserve to eat." Myra had not gone back to the nursery after that. She could not bear to watch. Today, she finished her report and sent it to the Galactic Council. Then she went to the common area to get some food. The station had a dining hall where both Verati and the few other alien species on board ate their meals. Mira usually sat alone at a small table in the corner. Nobody joined her. Nobody talked to her. She was eating a simple meal of protein bars and dried fruit when Warlord Kethvarn entered the room. The whole hall went quiet. Every Verati stood up and bowed their heads in respect. Kethvarn was the commander of this station. He was even larger than most Verati, with scars covering his face and arms from countless battles. His eyes were sharp and intelligent, and when he looked at someone, it felt like he was measuring their worth. His gaze passed over Myra without stopping. She was not worth measuring. She finished her meal and returned to her quarters. The day passed slowly. She exercised in her small room, pushing her body through routines that kept her fit, but would never make her strong by variety standards. She read books from her personal database. She looked at the pictures of her family and wondered if she would ever see them again. Night came to the station. The lights dimmed to simulate a day and night cycle. Mira lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling. She thought about her life before this assignment. She had been a promising officer in the Earth Defense Fleet. She had dreamed of commanding her own ship someday. Instead, she had been sent here to be a symbol, a token human on a station full of giants who thought she was worthless, but she did not regret coming. Someone had to build bridges between species. Someone had to try. Even if the variety did not respect her, even if they never saw her as an equal, she would keep trying. That was what humans did. They kept trying even when things seemed hopeless. She closed her eyes and drifted towards sleep. The alarm woke her 3 hours later. It was not a drill alarm. It was not a system warning. It was the emergency alert that meant the station was under attack. Red lights flashed in her room. The sound was deafening, a screaming siren that made her bones shake. Mira jumped out of bed and grabbed her emergency kit. She had trained for this. Every officer trained for this. But training and reality were very different things. Her hands were shaking as she pulled on her boots. Her heart was pounding so hard, she could feel it in her throat. An explosion rocked the station. She was thrown against the wall. The lights flickered and died, then came back dimly on emergency power. She could hear screaming in the distance, roaring, the sounds of battle. She ran to her door and opened it. The corridor outside was filled with smoke. Variety warriors were running past, weapons in their claws, heading toward the sounds of fighting. None of them looked at her. None of them stopped to tell her what was happening. She was alone, and somewhere deep in the station, she could hear the high-pitched cries of variety cubs screaming in terror. Myra ran through the smoke-filled corridor. The station shook again as another explosion hit somewhere nearby. Pieces of the ceiling fell around her. She dodged and kept moving. The cries of the cubs were getting louder. She did not think about what she was doing. She did not plan. Her legs carried her toward those sounds because something deep inside her could not ignore them. Children were screaming. It did not matter that they were not human children. They were scared and they needed help. The nursery wing was on the lower level of the station. Mira reached the main stairwell and found it blocked by fallen debris. She turned and found another route, crawling through a maintenance tunnel that was barely wide enough for her body. The metal was hot under her hands. Something was burning nearby. She emerged from the tunnel into a hallway she recognized. The nursery was just ahead. But as she ran toward it, a massive emergency bulkhead slammed down in front of her. She skidded to a stop, barely avoiding being crushed. The heavy metal door sealed with a terrible finality. Mira pressed her hands against the bulkhead. It was thick, solid. She could hear muffled sounds from the other side. Voices, roaring. The sounds of the battle were coming from there, too. The variety warriors were fighting on the other side of this door, and she was trapped on this side. She looked around. There was another door to her left. It was smaller, meant for service access. She ran to it and found it unlocked. She pushed through and found herself in a storage area connected to the nursery wing. The path ahead was clear. The nursery itself was chaos. The lights were flickering. Some of the walls had cracked from the explosions. And everywhere, variety cubs were crying, howling, scrambling over each other in panic. Myra counted quickly. 17 cubs. Some were very young, barely hatched, with soft scales and tiny claws. Others were older, almost reaching her waist, with harder scales and sharper teeth. The adult caretakers were nowhere to be seen. Mira searched quickly and found them in a side room. They were dead. Their bodies were torn apart by weapons she did not recognize. Burn marks covered the walls. Someone had already been here. Someone had killed the caretakers and left. She felt sick, but she pushed the feeling down. There was no time for that now. She ran back to the main nursery. The cubs saw her and reacted with confusion. They did not know her. She was strange and different, a creature they had never seen before. The older cubs growled at her. One of them, a female with dark green scales, lunged at her and scratched her arm with its claws. The cut was shallow, but it stung badly. Myra did not fight back. She held up her hands and spoke softly. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here to help." The cubs did not understand her words, but they seemed to understand her tone. The growling faded a little. The green-scaled female watched her with suspicious eyes, but did not attack again. Another explosion shook the station. This one was close. Very close. The cubs screamed and huddled together. Mira looked toward the main entrance of the nursery and saw smoke pouring through the cracks in the door. The battle was right outside now. She heard voices. Not Varati voices. These were different. Higher pitched. Clicking sounds mixed with words she had never heard before. Her blood went cold. She had read reports about the enemies of the Varati Dominion. She knew about the Kethmari swarm. The Kethmari were insect-like creatures. They traveled in massive fleets and attacked without warning. They were cruel and efficient, and they especially loved to target the young of their enemies. Killing cubs was a way to break the spirit of their foes. They were here for the children. Mira looked at the 17 cubs huddled in fear. They were not her species. They were not her responsibility. The Varati had ignored her and dismissed her for months. She could try to escape. She could find a hiding place and wait for rescue. No one would blame. No one would even know. But she looked at those cubs and saw children. Scared, helpless children who had no one to protect them. She made her choice. Mira grabbed a fallen piece of metal from the floor. It was heavy and had a sharp edge. It was not a real weapon, but it would have to do. She found a plasma cutter on the wall, part of the emergency repair equipment. She took that too. Then she moved to the main door of the nursery and took a position in front of it. Behind her, the cubs watched with wide eyes. They did not understand what she was doing. Neither did she, really. She was one small human against who knew how many Kethmari soldiers. This was probably going to be the last thing she ever did. The door shook. Someone was trying to break through. Mira raised her weapons and waited. A long minute passed. The banging stopped. Then a bright line appeared in the center of the door. They were cutting through. The metal glowed orange, then white. Mira could feel the heat on her face. She did not move. The door fell inward with a crash. Smoke and dust filled the air. Mira could barely see, but she saw the shape that came through. Tall and thin, with too many legs and arms that ended in sharp blades. Compound eyes that reflected the emergency lights. A Kethmari soldier died. It saw her and made a clicking sound. Confusion maybe, or amusement. This tiny creature standing alone in front of a room full of Varati cubs. What a strange thing. The Kethmari raised its blade and moved toward her. Myra did not run. She screamed and swung the plasma cutter in its throat. The creature was fast, but it had not expected her to attack. The tool connected and cut deep. Green blood sprayed across her face. The Kethmari fell. A second soldier pushed through the door. This one was ready. It swung its blade at her head. She ducked and felt the wind of its passage ruffle her hair. She thrust the metal pipe forward and caught it in the joint between its chest plates. It screamed and fell. More were coming. She could hear them in the corridor. Too many to count. The third HFY was bigger than the others. A leader, maybe. It looked at its fallen comrades and then at her. Its compound eyes studied her with cold intelligence. It understood now. This human was not going to let them pass. It attacked with both blades at once. Mira blocked one and twisted away from the other. But she was too slow. One of the blades caught her side, cutting deep from her hip to her ribs. Pain exploded through her body. She gasped and fell to one knee. The HFY made a satisfied clicking sound and raised its blade for the killing blow. Behind her, a cub roared. The green-scaled female who had scratched her earlier had jumped forward and bitten the HFY's leg. It was not enough to hurt the creature seriously, but it distracted it for a second. A second was all Myra needed. She drove the plasma cutter up into the HFY's chest. The creature shrieked and fell. Myra collapsed against the doorframe. Blood was pouring from her side. Her vision was getting dark at the edges. She could hear more enemies coming, more clicking voices in the smoke. She pulled herself up. She could not stand straight anymore. She could barely hold her weapons. But she stood in that doorway and raised them anyway. Behind her, 17 cubs huddled in silence. They had stopped crying. They were watching her. This strange, soft creature who was dying to protect them. Mira waited for the next enemy to come. The HFY did not come back right away. Mira could hear them in the distance, their clicking voices fading as they moved to other parts of the station. Maybe they thought she was dead. Maybe they were dealing with other threats. She did not know and did not care. Every minute they stayed away was another minute the cubs survived. She stumbled back from the doorway and collapsed against the wall. The wound in her side was bad. Very bad. She pressed her hand against it and felt warm blood seeping through her fingers. She needed medical attention. She needed a doctor, bandages, medicine. She had none of those things. What she had was an emergency kit. She pulled it from her belt with shaking hands and opened it. Inside was a small bottle of wound sealant, some bandages, and a few pain pills. It was not enough to fix the damage, but it might keep her alive for a while longer. She sprayed the wound sealant into the cut. The pain was so intense that she nearly passed out. She bit down on her sleeve to stop herself from screaming. The cubs were watching her with wide, frightened eyes. She did not want to scare them more than they already were. The sealant hardened and stopped most of the bleeding. She wrapped bandages around her torso as tightly as she could. Then she took 2 of the pain pills and swallowed them dry. Her hands were still shaking, but the bleeding had slowed. She might live. For now, she looked around the nursery. It was a mess. The walls were cracked. One of the ceiling panels had fallen. The emergency lights cast everything in a dim red glow. The air was getting colder. The heating system must have been damaged in the attack. The youngest cubs were starting to shiver. They were cold-blooded like all variety. Without heat, they would grow sluggish and weak. If the temperature dropped too much, they might not survive. Mira forced herself to move. She searched the room and found some blankets stored in a cabinet. They were meant for the caretakers, not the cubs. Variety did not coddle their young with soft things. But Myra was not Variety. She gathered the youngest hatchlings together and wrapped them in the blankets. At first they hissed and squirmed, not understanding what she was doing. But as the warmth surrounded them, they grew calm. One of them, a tiny thing with pale blue scales, pressed its face against her chest and made a soft sound. Almost like a purr. The older cubs watched from a distance. They did not trust her yet. The green-scaled female, the one who had bitten the HFY, sat apart from the others and stared at her with those amber eyes. There was something intelligent in that gaze, something measuring hours past. Myra worked to keep the cubs alive. She found a heating unit in the storage room and managed to repair it with parts from her emergency kit. It was not much, but it raised the temperature enough to keep the hatchlings from going into shock. She rationed the water from a broken pipe, filtering it through her jacket before giving it to the cubs. Food was harder. There was some in the nursery, but not enough for 17 growing cubs. She gave them what there was, making sure the smallest ones got their share. When the older cubs tried to push the little ones away, she stopped them, gently but firmly. They growled at her, but she did not back down. "Everyone eats," she told them. Everyone. They did not understand her words, but they understood her meaning. The night stretched on. The sounds of battle faded and returned. Sometimes she heard Vorati roars in the distance. Sometimes she heard Kethmari screams. The station shook with explosions. She did not know who was winning. She did not know if anyone was coming to help. She talked to the cubs to keep herself awake. She told them about Earth, about blue skies and green trees, about oceans that stretched as far as the eye could see, about her family, her mother who made the best soup in the whole city, her father who taught her how to fix machines, her little brother who wanted to be a pilot someday. The cubs did not understand her language, but they listened. Her voice seemed to calm them. Even the older ones stopped growling and moved closer to hear her speak. Sometime in the middle of the night, the green-scaled female came and sat beside her. It did not touch her. It did not make a sound. It just sat there, watching the door, like it was standing guard with her. Myra smiled despite the pain. "Thank you," she said softly. The cub looked at her and made a low rumbling sound. Maybe it was agreement. Maybe it was something else. Myra chose to believe it was friendship. The temperature dropped again near dawn. The heating unit was failing. Myra wrapped herself around the smallest hatchlings, using her own body heat to keep them warm. It was something no Vorati would ever do. Vorati believed that the weak should struggle on their own. That strength came from suffering, but Myra was not Vorati. She was human, and humans protected their young. All their young, even the weak ones, even the ones who might not survive otherwise. Because every life was worth fighting for. She sang to them. Old songs from Earth that her mother used to sing to her when she was small. Lullabies and nursery rhymes. Her voice was rough and tired, but the cubs seemed to like it. They pressed closer to her, their small bodies warm against hers. The green-scaled female came closer too. It curled up against her back, adding its heat to hers. Myra felt tears in her eyes. This cub had scratched her just hours ago. Now it was keeping her warm. Morning came, or what passed for morning, on the station. The lights flickered and changed slightly. The sounds of battle had gone quiet. That could mean anything. Victory or defeat. Rescue or death. Then she heard them. Clicking voices in the corridor. The Kethmari were coming back. Myra's body screamed in protest as she stood up. Her wound had opened again. Fresh blood was soaking through her bandages. She could barely see straight, but she picked up her weapons and moved to the doorway. 17 cubs watched her go. The smallest ones cried out when she left them. The older ones stood up and followed her, their tiny claws scraping on the floor. "Stay back," she told them. "Stay behind me." They did not understand the words, but they understood her gesture. They stopped near the wall and waited. The clicking grew louder. Shadows moved in the smoke beyond the ruined door. Myra counted them. 5, no 6. More than she could fight. Many more than she could beat. But she was not trying to beat them. She was trying to buy time. Every second the cubs lived was a victory. Every breath they took was a triumph. She raised her weapons and waited for the end. The first HFY stepped through the smoke. Its compound eyes found her immediately. It made a clicking sound that might have been laughter. This dying human, standing alone again. What a foolish creature! It raised its blade, and then the wall behind the HFY exploded inward. Warlord HFY came through the wall like a storm. His massive body smashed through metal and stone as if they were paper. His claws were red with blood. His armor was dented and scorched from hours of fighting. Behind him came a dozen of his finest warriors, their weapons blazing. The HFY never had a chance. HFY killed the first 3 before they could even turn around. His warriors finished the rest in seconds. The clicking screams of the enemy filled the corridor, then fell silent. The warlord stood in the smoke, his chest heaving, his amber eyes scanning the room. He had fought his way through half the station to reach this place. The nursery, the future of his species. He had expected to find bodies. 17 dead cubs in the torn, remains of whoever had failed to protect them. What he found instead made him freeze. The human was still standing. Barely. She was covered in blood, most of it her own. Her makeshift weapons hung from her hands like they weighed 1,000 pounds each. Her face was pale as death. But she was standing, and behind her, huddled against the wall, were 17 living cubs. Every single one of them was alive. Myra saw the Verati warriors, and her body finally gave out. Her legs buckled. She fell to her knees, then collapsed forward. Her weapons clattered to the floor. Darkness swallowed her vision. The last thing she heard was the cubs crying out. She woke in the medical bay. The lights were too bright. Everything hurt. She tried to move and gasped as pain shot through her side. A Verati medic appeared beside her, its scales a soft gray color that marked it as a healer. It made a rumbling sound and pressed the device against her neck. Coolness spread through her body. The pain faded to a dull ache. "Do not move," the medic said in rough English. "Your wounds are serious. You need rest." Myra tried to speak. Her throat was dry. "The cubs," she managed to whisper. "Are they safe?" The medic looked at her strangely. "They live. All of them. Because of you." She closed her eyes and let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. They were safe. She had done it. Somehow, impossibly, she had done it. She slept. When she woke again, the room was different, darker, quieter, and she was not alone. Warlord HFY sat in a chair beside her bed. His massive form was cramped in the small space. His amber eyes watched her with an expression she could not read. "You are awake," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. Myra tried to sit up. Pain stopped her. She settled back against the bed and looked at the warlord. "How long was I out?" "2 days. The medics say you nearly died. You lost too much blood. Your internal organs were damaged." He paused. "They say you should not have been able to stand at the end. Your body should have failed hours before we arrived." Myra did not know what to say to that. She remembered standing in that doorway. She remembered the HFY coming. She remembered deciding that she would not fall, no matter what. HFY leaned forward. His eyes bored into hers. "Why did you do it?" "Do what?" "Protect them. Risk your life. Nearly die." His claws tightened on the arms of his chair. "They were not your cubs. They were not your species. The Verati have shown you nothing but contempt since you arrived. We ignored you, dismissed you, treated you as worthless." His voice dropped lower. "Why would you die for us?" Mira was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the question. She thought about all the months of isolation and loneliness. All the time she had been pushed aside, laughed at, forgotten. She thought about the cubs, their scared eyes, their tiny claws, the way they had pressed against her for warmth. Because they were children, she said finally. They were scared. They were alone. And I was there. She met the warlord's eyes. That's all. There doesn't need to be another reason. Keth stared at her. Something moved behind his eyes. Confusion, maybe. Or the beginning of understanding. He did not speak for a long time. Finally, he stood up. The cubs will not leave your side, he said. We tried to move them to a new nursery. They refused. The older ones attacked our warriors when they tried to separate them from you. A strange sound came from his throat. It took Myra a moment to realize it was a laugh. Dazara, the green one, bit the commander of my personal guard. Drew blood. She's barely 6 months old. Myra felt a smile tug at her lips despite the pain. She bit a Kethmari for me too. I know. I saw the recordings. Keth moved toward the door. The security systems captured everything. Your stand against the enemy. The way you cared for the cubs during the night. The way you held the youngest ones against your body to keep them warm. He paused at the door. I have shown these recordings to my officers. They do not know what to make of them. And you? Myra asked. What do you make of them? The warlord was silent. Then he turned to look at her one last time. I think I've been wrong about many things, he said slowly. About humans. About strength. About what it means to protect. He opened the door. Rest now, Lieutenant Chun. When you are healed, we will talk more. He left. Mira lay in the bed and stared at the ceiling. Her body ached. Her mind was foggy from the medicine. But she felt something strange. Something that felt almost like hope. A sound came from the corner of the room. Myra turned her head and saw them. 17 cubs, piled together in a heap of scales and tails and tiny claws. They had been there the whole time, she realized, watching, waiting for her to wake up. Desara separated from the group and climbed onto the bed. She was careful, moving slowly, avoiding Myra's wounded side. She curled up next to Myra's arm and made that low rumbling sound again. The sound that meant friendship, trust, family. One by one, the other cubs climbed up too. The smallest hatchlings nestled against her uninjured side. The older ones arranged themselves around her feet. They piled on top of each other, a warm weight of scales and breathing bodies. Myra should have told them to get down. She was injured. She needed space to heal, but she did not have the heart to push them away. These cubs had watched her nearly die for them. They had followed her to the doorway and stayed behind her when the enemy came. They had chosen her, in some strange way she did not fully understand. Okay, she whispered. You can stay. Zara made a satisfied sound and closed her eyes. Myra closed her eyes too. And for the first time in 6 months on this station, she did not feel alone. The recording spread across the Verati Dominion like fire across dry grass. Every ship, every station, every colony world saw what had happened in the nursery of Station Krathvor. They watched the small human woman stand against the Kethmari. They watched her wrap the youngest cubs in blankets and hold them against her body for warmth. They watched her sing strange songs in a foreign language while 17 children of their fiercest enemies slept peacefully around her. The Verati did not know what to think. For thousands of years, their culture had taught them that strength was everything. The strong survived. The weak perished. That was the natural order. That was how the universe worked. Children competed for food and attention. Those who could not fight for themselves did not deserve to live. This had been the way of things since the beginning of their recorded history. But this human had shown them something different. She had protected the weak instead of leaving them to struggle. She had given food to those who could not fight for it. She had shared her warmth with those who needed it. And in doing so, She had kept 17 cubs alive through a night that should have killed them all. The debates in the High Council were fierce. The old guard, the traditionalists, dismissed the humans' actions as foolishness. She had gotten lucky, they said. She had survived by accident. Her way was the way of weakness, and weakness had no place in the Dominion. But the younger generation saw things differently. They had watched those recordings. They had seen Myra Chun stand in that doorway with her body broken and her blood pooling on the floor. They had seen her refuse to fall, and they asked themselves, was that weakness? Or was that something else entirely? The Zara grew up asking those same questions. The green-scaled cub, who had bitten the Kefmari and curled up beside the wounded human, became something new in Virati society. She was raised differently than any Virati before her. Myra Chun stayed on Station Krathvar as she healed, and during that time, the Zara refused to leave her side. The bond between them became something the Virati had no word for. Myra taught the Zara things that no Virati had ever learned. She taught her that caring for others was not weakness. She taught her that protecting the helpless took more courage than hunting prey. She taught her that true strength came not from defeating your enemies, but from lifting up those around you. And the Zara listened. Years passed. Myra eventually returned to Earth, but she came back to visit often. The 17 cubs she had saved grew into adults, and every single one of them remembered her. They remembered the night in the nursery. They remembered her songs. They remembered the warmth of her body against theirs when the cold threatened to kill them. They called her clan mother. It was a word they had to invent, because the Virati language had never needed it before. But they needed it now. The Zara became the first Virati, ambassador to Earth. It was a position that would have been unthinkable before the attack on Station Krathvar. The Virati had never valued diplomacy. They had conquered their way across the stars. Why talk when you could fight? But the Zara had learned a different way. She built bridges between the Virati Dominion and the human governments. She negotiated treaties that her ancestors would have laughed at. She showed her people that there were other forms of strength besides violence. Some Virati hated her for it. They called her weak, corrupted by human influence. But more and more, especially among the younger generations, began to listen to her message. They began to question the old ways. They began to wonder if there might be a better path. The Zara had cubs of her own. She did not raise them in the clichés like her parents had been raised. She kept them with her. She fed them herself. She protected them and cared for them and taught them the things Myra had taught her. Other Virati began to do the same. Slowly at first, then faster as the years went by. The crochet system, which had existed for thousands of years, began to collapse. Parents wanted to raise their own children. They wanted to protect them, not abandon them to competition and struggle. Within 3 generations, the crochets were gone. The Virati built a monument on Station Krathvar. It stood in the center of the rebuilt nursery wing, where the next generation of Virati cubs were raised with love and care and protection. The monument was a statue of a human woman. She was small and soft, with no claws or scales or natural weapons. She stood in a doorway with a piece of metal in one hand and a plasma cutter in the other. Behind her, barely visible, were the shapes of 17 cubs. The inscription at the base of the statue was written in both Virati and English. It said, "Strength is not in the kill. Strength is in the keeping." Myra Chun lived to see it unveiled. She was old by then, her hair gray and her body frail. But she stood straight and tall as the cloth fell away and revealed the statue. Beside her stood the Zara, now the most powerful diplomat in the Virati Dominion. And beside the Zara stood her cubs, 3 little ones with bright amber eyes, who looked up at the statue with wonder. "Who is that?" one of them asked. The Zara knelt down beside her child. "That is your clan grandmother," she said. She saved my life once, long ago. She saved the lives of 16 others too. And she taught us something important. What did she teach you? The Zara looked at Mira, and the old human woman smiled back at her. There were tears in both their eyes. Tears of joy. Tears of pride. Tears for all the years that had passed and all the changes that had come. She taught us how to love, the Zara said. The ceremony ended. The crowds dispersed. But Mira stayed for a while longer, looking at the statue. It was strange, seeing herself immortalized in stone. She did not feel like a hero. She did not feel like she had done anything special. She had just been in the right place at the right time, and she had done what any decent person would do. But maybe that was the point. Maybe that was what the Varadi needed to learn. That being decent, being kind, being willing to protect those who could not protect themselves was not weakness. It was the greatest strength of all. The Zara's cubs ran over to her. They had been shy at first. These little Varadi children, unsure how to act around the legendary human from the stories. But children were children, no matter the species. It did not take them long to warm up. "Clan grandmother," the youngest one shouted, "will you tell us a story?" Mira laughed and slowly lowered herself to sit on a bench. Her old bones protested, but she ignored them. "What kind of story do you want to hear?" "Tell us about Earth." Another cub said, "Tell us about the blue skies and the green trees." "Tell us about the oceans." The third one added, "I want to hear about the oceans." Mira gathered them close, these children of a species that had once dismissed her as worthless. They pressed against her, warm and eager, just like their mother had done so many years ago in a dark and frightening nursery. "All right," she said, her voice soft with memory and love. "Let me tell you about a place far away, where the sky is blue and the trees are green, and the oceans stretch as far as the eye can see." The cubs listened. The Zara watched from nearby, her eyes bright with emotion. And somewhere in the great expanse of the universe, on 100 Varadi worlds, parents held their children close and taught them the lessons of a small human woman who had changed everything. Strength is not in the kill. Strength is in the keeping. And that truth, once learned, could never be forgotten.